Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Ethan Cole. I live with my wife Lena on a short cul-de-sac called Willow Court, 8 houses wide and quiet enough that you know every dog by its bark. We're a 15-minute drive from the interstate and 20 from the downtown skyline. The local grocery is a Safeway just off the main road. The high school sits behind a field of metal bleachers and faded yard lines. And the nearest hospital is a community ER that shares a parking lot with a dentist and a physical therapy clinic. In summer, the lawn sprinklers kick on around 8 p.m. and everything smells like wet grass. I run a small auto repair shop a couple miles away near the rail spur. It's nothing special, just 2 bays, a 2-post lift rated for £10,000, a tyre machine that overheats if you push it, and a pegboard covered in wrenches I've owned since I was a kid. Before that, I did a stint in the National Guard. They taught me how to read maps, clear rooms, use radios properly, and treat bleeding. I never had to use any of that in a serious way after I got out. That changed in one long night. It started on a hot Friday in July. The thermometer on the porch read 91 in the shade. I was in the garage at home, replacing brake pads on an old Honda for a neighbour and listening to talk radio. The station broke to a live bulletin about unusual violent attacks near the riverfront and 2 major intersections with traffic shut down. The anchor's voice was calm because it was early and no one knew what it was yet. I wiped my hands and turned up the volume. Lena popped her head in and asked if I wanted iced tea. Behind her, the TV in the living room switched from a show to an emergency alert. The screen went black, then the scrolling text and the tones you hear during tornado warnings. The message told everyone to stay indoors and avoid unknown individuals acting erratically. No one used the word epidemic, not yet. Sirens started to stack in layers from the freeway, that distant wind-up that rises and falls as units head toward the same place. A police helicopter thumped past over the houses, low enough to rattle the aluminum ladder hanging on my garage wall. The dog 2 doors down, a noisy beagle with a bell on his collar, went off and wouldn't stop. Lena stood in the doorway and watched the static-filled alert screen change to the local news desk. The anchor said they had unconfirmed reports of multiple attacks, people who wouldn't respond to commands, fights turning into something worse, officers unable to restrain suspects. The feed cut to shaky phone footage taken from a second-floor balcony above the strip mall on Grant Avenue. A small crowd ran in different directions. One person stumbled and didn't get up. Another person bent over them and didn't stop when pulled away. The camera dropped, and we got a blurry view of pavement and shoes. Then it cut back to the studio. I remember thinking power companies must be dealing with overdraw because our porch lights flickered. I keep a 500-watt gasoline generator in the side yard on a little concrete pad with a lockable cage around it. It's a typical pull-start model with a grounding lug and a whisper of rust around the muffler. I also keep a transfer switch on the house panel because we lose power every winter and I got tired of stringing extension cords. When the lights blinked twice more, I rolled up the side door and checked the fuel. I had 3 5-gallon cans treated with stabilizer. We were fine. I didn't start it, but I ran a test pull, so I knew the choke and throttle were behaving. Frank Dawson, our next-door neighbor, walked over with hands raised like he didn't want to startle me. He's in his 60s, retired police sergeant, big shoulders that turned to a little belly over the years, still keeps his hair buzzed. He said his son just texted from the other side of town about a pile-up on the connector and people running on the freeway shoulder. He had his old handheld police scanner out, a Uniden that looks like a brick with a stubby antenna, and he was scanning fire and EMS frequencies. The channels were more static than voice, but the words were enough. Unresponsive, multiple subjects, containment, scene unsafe. Frank's voice stayed level, but he told me to lock our side gate, bring the cars inside, and put something heavy against the front door. When a guy with his background speaks like he's giving advice instead of an order, you do it fast. Before sunset, the first gunshots echoed from the direction of the freeway. They weren't in long strings like you hear at a range. They came as single pops and short bursts that sounded like somebody trying to stop something right in front of them. I closed the garage door halfway to keep some airflow, but hide what we were doing. Lena took an inventory inside. We don't keep much canned food because we normally go to the store every other day. We had pasta, rice, and enough beans and vegetables to last maybe a week if we were careful. In the hall closet, I kept a first aid kit I built out over the years. Tourniquets, gauze, gloves, saline, a thermal blanket, tape, and a blood pressure cuff. We had a little camping stove and 2 propane canisters in the shed. In my toolbox, I keep headlamps, work gloves, safety glasses, earplugs, and a box of N95 masks from back when wildfires sent smoke over the county one summer. I laid out what I thought we might need and kept the rest inside the metal cabinets. I'm not a collector of weapons, and I don't parade anything around. I have a 12-gauge pump shotgun that belonged to my father, with a short barrel for home defense, a box of buckshot, and another box of slugs I use for the occasional trip out to a friend's property. It's an old Mossberg that still runs smooth. I have a .22 bolt-action rifle I use for small pests and practice, nothing exotic. Frank keeps things in a safer place and doesn't talk about it, though I've seen him take meticulous care of a steel-framed revolver at his kitchen table with the blinds closed. By 8:45 p.m, more neighbours were standing in their driveways, as if the presence of other people would make it normal. 2 houses down, Jamal Ortiz peered over his porch rail with his phone and a small drone case at his feet. He's 17, saves for gadgets by fixing phones out of his bedroom and mowing lawns. He's good with software, better with radios, and he can solder a broken wire on a cheap quadcopter without blinking. His mother yelled for him to come inside. He yelled back that he needed to check the parking lot behind the strip mall. He said it like it was a routine chore, and I realized none of us had practice for this. Jamal's drone is a compact model that folds up and weighs less than a bottle of water. He got an FAA registration last year because he's the kind of kid who reads rules and does them right. When he launched, the motors sounded like 4 angry mosquitoes rising into the still air. The streetlights flickered again and died. Somewhere a transformer snapped and popped, and a section of the neighborhood went dark, then half lit again. I started the generator and used the transfer switch to bring up a few circuits, the fridge, garage outlets, living room lights, and the hallway to the bedrooms. We kept everything else off to save fuel. I turned the garage into a small hub because that's where my tools live. I set up my portable work light on a stand and aimed it toward the bench. I pulled my CB radio out of a storage crate, clamped it to a battery with a little inverter, and put the magnetic antenna on the outside of the garage door. CB isn't pretty, but it travels. Frank stayed in the driveway with his scanner, one ear cup on, muting at intervals to tell me what he heard. There were broken transmissions about a hospital diverting ambulances, a police unit requesting barricades near the south entrance to the mall, and then the sound you never forget. A voice yelling for backup, too much wind, and a hiss as it cut off mid-sentence. Across the street, something happened that removed the last thin layer between us and understanding. The Martins, a young couple who moved in last year with a toddler, were in their front yard because the heat made the house feel like an oven. Their daughter was strapped in a stroller with a fan clipped to the handle. The father waved when he saw me and then looked past me with wide eyes. A man I didn't recognize came stumbling down the sidewalk like he'd run a long way. At first, I assumed he was drunk or hurt. He moved straight for the stroller. The mother stepped between them and put both hands up, palms out, saying something I couldn't hear. The man didn't respond. He pushed forward. The father grabbed him by the shoulders and tried to peel him away. I'm not going to describe the details. I'll say only that the man acted like nothing registered, like any words or pain couldn't get through. It took 3 of us to drag him backward far enough that the father could roll the stroller inside and close the door. The man kept coming until Frank shouted and leveled his revolver in a stance I recognized from training. The man still didn't stop. Frank didn't fire. He shouted again, backed us toward the curb, and I used a floor jack handle from my garage like a long bar to keep the man at a distance. We finally pinned him against a parked car and kept him there until he went still, breathing shallow but not trying to stand. We pulled back to our side of the street and locked our doors. That was the last time I thought some official help would turn the corner. We didn't call it a barricade at first. We just moved what we had. I drove our SUV across the mouth of the cul-de-sac and angled it to block half the lane. Frank backed his old Crown Vic next to it, bumper line to bumper, and we stacked filled trash cans behind the wheels to make it harder to move without keys. I keep a stack of plywood sheets and a roll of construction plastic from a shed project. We used the plywood to cover the cut-through between our fence and the next yard, drilled pilot holes, and drove 3-inch screws into the posts. Jamal brought over 4 steel fence stakes he found in his mum's gardening bin, and we pounded them into the lawn using a sledge, tied paracord between them, and hung a bright orange mesh deer fence to slow anyone pushing through the side yards. It wasn't a wall, but at night it forced shapes to snag and hesitate. That was enough. Jamal asked if he could set one of his old Wi-Fi cameras on my gutter and another on Frank's porch, pointed toward the street. I had a spare battery pack from the shop that could run the DVR for hours. We mounted the cameras with zip ties. He set notifications on a tablet so motion would ping us. He also pulled out 2 little handheld radios he'd programmed to the same channel. They were the sort of family radio service units you buy at a sporting goods store with a few miles of range if the air is clear. They do better than shouting. At 10:10 p.m, our front room TV picked up a new alert that used the word uncontained for the first time. The pitch of the city changed. We got an onshore breeze that moved the heat around. With the windows shut, you could still hear the high whine of a siren being left on without the motor running. That usually means the driver left in a hurry. Helicopter rotors went past again and then again. Jamal's drone sent back a view of the grocery store lot, and we could see shapes moving in groups between the cars. Some wobbled like their balance was off. They bumped into bumpers and fenders and kept going in the same general direction like they were following sound. Around 11:30 p.m, the door to the house next to the Dawsons opened and Dr. Erin Patel stepped out. She works at the ER and sometimes parks her small hybrid on our street when her driveway gets boxed in. She's calm in every conversation and doesn't say much about work except to roll her shoulders and shake her head after a long shift. She crossed the lawn with a soft bag on her shoulder and asked if she could use our garage light. Frank and I waved her in, and she spread out supplies on my workbench like she'd trained to do it in a moving vehicle. She had gloves, IV start kits, suture material, and an assortment of antibiotics. She also had a portable oxygen bottle with a regulator. She spoke evenly when she told us that bites were progressing to fever and confusion in hours, not days. She said restraining people didn't work because they didn't respond to pain or orders. She said the ER staff got told to shelter where they were and protect the building. Then the radios went quiet except for occasional requests for help that never got answers. When a doctor chooses each word, you hear the shape of the truth. She asked if we had anyone inside who was hurt. We didn't. She told us to keep it that way. We sat on overturned buckets and decided to treat the garage as a hub. I ran an extension cord from the generator to the workbench. We set up the CB and a battery-powered AM/FM radio. Jamal positioned his tablet on a stand so we could monitor the driveway cameras. Lena organised a shelf with labelled bins for medical supplies, hand tools and flashlights. We decided on a simple radio call-out. If you clicked the transmit button twice, it meant come now. If you clicked once, it meant I'm fine. We did this because words jam the channel when you're scared, and clicks don't need words. Frank taught us how to scan quickly with the lights off. He said you don't stare into the dark. You keep your eyes moving and watch for edges where motion breaks a line. He positioned a folding chair in the doorway so he could lean and see the street with only his head exposed. He kept the revolver holstered and the safety glasses on the workbench. He repeated what the scanner was telling him. Responses collapsing, dispatchers switching to emergency traffic only, and then long empty stretches where the squelch hissed and no one spoke. When the channel is quiet like that, you hear your own breathing, and it doesn't seem to fit inside your chest. Not everyone on the block wanted to be part of it. Across from us, the Delgados tried to pack their sedan with suitcases and boxes and shouted at each other about which road was faster. They ignored Frank when he told them to wait for daylight. They backed down the cul-de-sac, had to turn because of our blockade, then tried to squeeze between our vehicles and the sidewalk. They got through with a scrape of plastic on steel and drove away. We watched their taillights cut past the last turn and disappear toward the main road. There was nothing else to do for them. 2 others on the street shut their blinds and turned off lights. One elderly neighbour, who lives alone, put notes on her window in thick marker. "I'm okay." We checked on her anyway and left her a handheld radio on the porch with instructions to press the big button and say our names. By just past midnight, that first night became the kind where you measure time by battery levels and the smell of gasoline. We took turns resting in the living room, but every 15 minutes something new jolted us up. A car alarm, the crack of glass, a sprinting shape crossing the street, or a sudden heavy quiet that felt worse than sound. Around 1:20 a.m. small groups of infected came up our road, 2 or 3 at a time, walking with an uneven tilt like the surface sloped differently than they expected. The orange mesh on the side yard did its job. It caught the first person at chest height and slowed them long enough that Frank could yell and I could step outside with a heavy flashlight and a long pry bar to block and push without getting close. We didn't fight. We diverted. We used distance. Erin stood behind us with gloves on and the soft bag at her feet and told us to keep our sleeves down, keep our faces shielded, keep all wounds covered. Lena kept a spray bottle of diluted bleach on the bench and wiped anything that got touched. The camera viewing the mouth of the cul-de-sac pinged like a smoke detector with low batteries. Jamal set the tablet volume low. The ping meant something big enough to register was moving. At first, it was 3 individuals crossing the far corner, bumping into the trunk of the willow at the median. Then it was 6. Then the angle widened to show more shapes coming from the direction of the main road, like a busy sidewalk after a concert lets out. Frank said we needed to push the barricade wider and add height. We moved my pickup, a long bed 3/4 ton from the early 2000s I keep for towing, and parked it nose to nose with the SUV, both angled inward. I ratchet strapped a section of chain link panel between the beds and used 2 steel sawhorses to prop up more fencing taken from behind my shed. We tied it with wire and it wobbled but held. We filled 2 contractor bags with gravel and dropped them at the base to keep it from skittering. At 2:05 a.m, Jamal crashed his drone on purpose. He'd been sending it just high enough to clear rooftops, using the wide-angle camera to sweep toward the grocery store lot and back. He punched up an old route and told me quietly he was going to do something loud. He flew out over the mouth of the cul-de-sac, dropped to just above bumper height, and gunned it toward a section of the side street we'd soaked with gasoline from 2 leftover cans he'd scavenged earlier when he said he needed to clean up a spill. He pitched the drone down so the rotors chopped the air closer to the pavement and then shoved it into the fuel like a skipping stone. The battery pack sparked, the vapor lit. It wasn't a fireball. It was a sudden low sheet of moving flame that rolled and then died because it had little to feed on. It was still enough to draw half the shapes that had been wandering toward our end. Jamal's hands shook afterward. He went inside and sat on the floor with his back to the couch for a minute until his breathing leveled. I brought him water and told him it worked. He said he knew it would. He didn't like watching it. The first real pressure hit just before dawn. The street gradient tilts slightly downhill toward us from the main road. As the sky went grey, we could see more infected drifting our way, numbers that made you stop counting individuals and think in clumps. The plywood on the cut-through buckled when 2 heavier bodies pressed against it. The mesh fence bowed. The paracord strands creaked. Frank told everyone to move to positions we'd marked in our heads earlier. I took the gap between the trucks. Frank took the left, where the fence met the hedges. Lena and Erin stayed 10 feet back to watch hands and faces and to warn us if anyone flanked. And Jamal took the upstairs window in our house with a spotlight and the radio to call out movement. The garage door was down to knee height to keep our silhouettes hidden while letting us duck inside. It felt thin and too light. We didn't want to use the shotgun, but there is a limit to what metal bars and boards can do against numbers. Frank kept saying, "Distance and barrier, don't lean over, don't reach." The first 3 who reached the makeshift fence were the easiest. They tangled in it, and we pressed them back with long handles, faces turned away. Then more hands grabbed the fencing and pulled in different directions, and the wire ties snapped. The chain link sheet buckled inward until it was touching the side of my pickup. Erin told us to step back and not wedge ourselves between a vehicle and the barrier, so we did, and that meant the barrier came down. When it did, 4 shapes tumbled through at once, scrambling and rising. Frank raised his revolver, kept his hands steady, and fired twice. The report was flat and heavy in the close air. The first 2 fell and didn't get up. The third and fourth clutched at the bumper and tried to pull themselves forward. I used the bar to pin an arm and push until the person slid sideways away from the gap. Another pair came through the hedges and hit the mesh with their shoulders. It tore and made a mouth-shaped opening that widened as more weight piled in. We fell back the way we'd planned, house to house. It wasn't clean. You don't move in a straight line during a retreat in a neighborhood. You hop across lawn edges, dodge between cars, and keep yourself from tripping on hoses. We had staged a ladder against the rear fence between our yard and the Dawsons. We climbed it and pulled it after us. Frank pointed to the center house of the cul-de-sac, which had the cleanest stairwell and the heaviest interior doors. The owner wasn't home. They'd left earlier with a packed SUV. We had checked and secured it before midnight. We moved there using backyards and fences, using the break between houses that most people use to roll their trash cans. Jamal fell once and scraped his palm, and Erin took the second to rinse it with saline and tape gauze around it before we moved again. That second probably saved him an infection of a different kind later. Inside the center house, we went upstairs and did what you do in any siege. You break down furniture and use it where it matters. We pulled a mattress against the top of the stairs and braced it with a desk and a bookshelf laid on its side. We unscrewed bed frames and used the metal pieces like rails to slide under door handles to keep them shut. We set a bucket line for water and another for a different purpose. We kept our voices low. We listened through the floor. The first impacts on the lower level sounded like a stack of boxes tipping over. Then came the repetitious thump of hands, not fists, pushing against the front door and the back slider. We had already blocked the slider with a broom handle cut to length and a metal bar in the track. When the glass finally broke, we didn't hear the bright crash you expect. It was more of a soft collapse with 2 or 3 hard tinkling sounds after it, the way safety glass goes when the laminates let it sag. Bodies pushed through, bumped into chairs, and slid on the marbled tile. We smelled the change in air pressure before we felt footsteps on the staircase. Jamal whispered counts from the top landing as he peered through a cracked door into the hallway. 2 on the stairs, 1 more behind, stop, another at the bottom. Frank held the shotgun then. He hates long guns in hallways because there's less room to swing them, but he said its sound alone could keep more from pushing. He waited until the first figure reached the mattress barricade and started to climb. Then he racked the pump, and the sound filled the upstairs like a slammed door. The figure didn't hesitate. That told us what we needed to know. Frank fired once at close range. The blast deafened us in the confined space. The recoil came back into his shoulder, and he absorbed it like someone who'd practiced. The shape fell backward into the others, and they tumbled. We took the pause to slide the desk another inch, to wedge a chair leg deeper, to breathe once through our mouths and blink. We didn't fire again for a while. The point of a barricade isn't to beat anyone. It's to make your enemy tire out before you do. They pushed and slipped. We held and replaced. Erin checked our hands and faces for any cuts we'd missed and taped over a scratch on my forearm I hadn't felt when I went through the fence. Lena refilled water bottles and lined them on the windowsill. Jamal used the radio to tell Mrs. Daniels, the elderly neighbour, not to move and to stay quiet. She acknowledged and whispered she had a camping stove and would boil water later. It was a normal sentence said at a strange time, and it grounded me. Helicopters came back overhead around 5:30 a.m. We saw them through the gaps in the blinds, black shapes that moved with purpose and never slowed. The news anchor's voice returned on the battery radio, steady and measured, reading from prepared lines, while different voices whispered to each other in the background off mic. The word uncontained came again, followed by directions to stay where you are if safe, to assist neighbours if you can, and to avoid contact with anyone showing signs of fever or unresponsiveness. There was a list of symptoms read twice. Erin listened while sitting on the top step with her back against the wall. Her shoulders sagged one notch lower at the list. It matched what she had seen. We stopped expecting an organised rescue after that. By 9 a.m, the pressure at the door eased. The shapes in the hallway below moved away from the stairs, bumping into walls and corners with no clear path. The house fell quiet except for the occasional scrape near the kitchen, and we realised the noise outside had changed from many small sounds to an even hush. The sun was up and it was already hot. We kept the blinds shut so we wouldn't silhouette ourselves. Between us, we had about a day and a half of food if we rationed, 2 gallons of drinking water, and more water in toilet tanks, and the hot water heater if we had to draw it. Erin said we could stay another day, but not much more, without risking dehydration and mistakes. Frank asked about running for the high school, which had been listed as an emergency shelter in a pamphlet that came with a property tax bill 3 years ago. Erin said it was set up for that kind of conversion and had wide corridors and a generator. She also said, if it still stands, with a flat voice that made me picture the locker-lined hallways with doors propped open and no one in them. We spent the midday hours doing quiet tasks. In a siege, you pass between adrenaline and waiting. During waiting, you stack your deck. I reinforced the pickup in my driveway because if we were leaving at first light the next day, it had to be ready to survive contact with curbs and bumpers. Back at my shop, I keep a roll of mild steel plate, little more than 1/8 of an inch thick, for patching. I'd brought some home for a welding project that never happened. I don't keep a full welding rig at the house, but I do keep a drill, self-tapping screws, and 2 pieces of square tubing that I'd cut to length months ago. Using the quiet hours, I bolted the plates inside the truck's doors so they wouldn't slit or catch. I cut strips of stall mat from the shed and screwed them as padding onto the grill to protect the radiator from a slow push through debris. I taped a small window of polycarbonate over the lower corner of the windshield on the driver's side as a sacrificial layer. None of it would stop anything serious, but it would buy us seconds if we misjudged. Jamal inventoried batteries, mapped device runtimes, and repacked his backpack with a power bank, a roll of electrical tape, a coil of paracord, and 2 small camera modules. He also found an old yellow road flare in his mum's car emergency kit and handed it to me like it was fragile. Erin repacked the medical bag and taught Lena how to wrap a sprain fast. Frank slept for 40 minutes in a chair with his chin on his chest and then walked the upstairs rooms to check angles and exits. At noon, we set up a very small meal and ate in turns. We kept our hands clean and our voices low. It felt strange to chew calmly while the rest of the world worked itself into a different shape, but you force normal tasks because they keep your planning clear. Around 2 p.m, the neighbourhood sprinklers came on because the timers didn't know any better. The soft hiss turned into a water on asphalt smell that drifted up through the stairwell. Through a crack in the blinds, I watched a red tricycle lay on its side in the street, handlebar tassels stuck to wet pavement. A plastic grocery bag rode a puff of wind and snagged on a mailbox. The quiet wasn't peace. It was the pause between waves. We took the time to mark a route out of the cul-de-sac that used driveways and lawns and avoided the open street where groups tended to collect. We would go before dawn because the light would be enough to see, but not enough to silhouette us against house windows. The pickup would go first. The back seat would carry medical supplies, food, and water. Lena would ride passenger and keep a handheld radio. Frank would ride in the bed under a topper with a small viewing slot and a piece of plywood under his knees to keep them from bumping the steel. Jamal would ride with us until we reached the high school road, then scout on foot to check the gate if it looked blocked. Erin would sit behind me and keep watch to the right. She can see details even under stress, and that matters more than muscle. We grabbed rest in 90-minute slices. You don't really sleep when the air feels like it's waiting. I lay on the carpet with my arm over my eyes and listened to faint footsteps from the house next door. Probably the family moving quietly from room to room. Lena stroked my hair once and then rested her palm on my chest so I could time my breath to the weight. When I got up, she slept, and I put a sheet over her because the air conditioning had been off since midnight and the generator only ran for lights and the fridge. I turned the generator off between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. to save fuel, then ran it for an hour to cool the fridge again. I changed oil and checked the spark plug as a habit. Small engines like clean air and fuel. At 5:50 p.m, we heard the unmistakable clatter of metal on pavement at the mouth of the cul-de-sac. It sounded like someone dragging a signpost. Jamal raised his hand for quiet and pointed at the tablet. The camera showed 3 people moving together, bumping into the temporary fence section we had left half hanging. One of them wore a grocery store apron. They pressed and then drifted away, moved by sound more than sight. At 6:10 p.m, we got our first human voice that day that wasn't on a radio or coming from one of us. Someone at the far end shouted help with the sharp tone of a person who hasn't adjusted to how sound travels now. We didn't answer. Frank braced against the urge to respond like a reflex. He whispered, "If you yell now, you pour everything in." The voice shouted again and then got closer, then turned into a different set of sounds that I don't want to describe. We breathed and did nothing. I wrote that down in my head for later, because in these situations, the hardest thing to do is not act. We used the last of the daylight to make final checks. I changed the truck's air filter and checked tire pressures because low tires make heat and heat makes blowouts. I secured the spare under the bed with an extra strap. I staged a tow strap, a small bottle jack, and a breaker bar behind the driver's seat. I taped a small flashlight under the dash where I could grab it without looking. I clipped a multi-tool to my belt and a pair of mechanic's gloves to my back pocket. I put a heavy hoodie behind the seat, even though it was hot, because it protects your arms from glass. Lena packed copies of important documents in a sealed folder and put it in a small backpack with water, granola bars, and a roll of duct tape. Erin wrote our names and a contact number on each of our forearms in permanent marker. She did it like it was a normal task. No one spoke for a few seconds afterwards. We slept in our clothes and set alarms for 4:15 a.m. I don't know if I slept. I remember blinking, then the phone vibrating, then the room being dark in a way that carries weight. The generator stayed off so we wouldn't telegraph activity. We moved by headlamp with red filters taped over the lenses. We ate something fast and drank water. We used the bathroom and flushed only once. I opened the garage with the manual release and moved the door just enough to clear the roofline of the pickup. Frank checked the shotgun and loaded 5 shells in the tube, chamber empty. He clipped a light to the fore end, but said he wouldn't turn it on unless we absolutely had to. Jamal slung his backpack and tightened the straps until it sat high on his shoulders. We rolled the pickup into the driveway in neutral. Then I started it with the headlights off and the parking lights taped to cut glare. The engine idled at a steady RPM. I felt better with that sound under my hands. We filed out the rear gate, using the fence line as cover, and approached the mouth of the cul-de-sac on the lawns so shoes wouldn't crunch on loose rock. The sprinklers had left the grass damp, and it soothed the air a little, less dust in the throat. Through the last hedge we could see the main road, and beyond it the dim sign for the grocery store and, further, the dark shape of the high school bleachers against the grey sky. We waited. That's a step people skip. You run when you want the feeling of action. Waiting gives you the information you need. We counted 30 seconds of no movement beyond a lone figure in the far corner turning slowly in place. Then a two-note call from a bird I couldn't name. Then a car door somewhere soft close with no human follow-up. Frank whisper counted to 20. We went. I drove slow at first to keep the tires quiet, then faster as we cleared the pinch where fences met at the mouth. We used the left shoulder where the sidewalk had a slope cut for bicycles. I kept the wheel steady and eyes scanning far, not fixated on anything near the bumper. Lena called out, "Right clear." Erin called out, "Left clear." And Jamal called rear clear from the small window in the topper. We passed the mailbox, the red tricycle, the broken fence panel. We rolled over a line of sprinkler heads and heard them click against the tire tread. The first figure we saw in the open street was a man in office clothes in Seoul, standing in the middle of the lane, looking toward nothing. He didn't react to the engine. He didn't step aside. I steered around him and felt the urge to honk, an old habit you drop quick when you realize sound brings numbers. 2 blocks down, the main road widened to 4 lanes with a median. I took the near right lane and stayed close to the curb so nothing could flank us from the sidewalk without us seeing it. The grocery store lot sat to our left. In the dawn light, it looked like a map of bad decisions. Cars parked at odd angles, doors left open, shopping carts piled in a clump, and a pallet jack abandoned near the loading dock. A semi-trailer sat with its doors open and the back end sagging. I kept my eyes forward and watched for motion across lanes. Erin said, 3 right, and I saw them, 3 people moving together along the storefronts. Not fast, not slow, steady. We stayed in our lane and they didn't intersect our path. The high school sat behind a chain-link fence with a sliding vehicle gate on rollers. The district had installed a keypad after a vandalism spree last year, but they left the gate open during the day. Now it stood half open, half closed, stuck at a skewed angle that looked like someone tried to shut it while a car blocked the track. A small sedan had its front wheel against the guidepost. Its engine was cold. The bleachers rose behind like a low ship on land. I stopped the truck 20 yards short and put the flashes on because their rhythmic blink can catch eyes and give you a beat to count against. Jamal hopped down, hugged the fence to avoid the open lane, and jogged to the gate to check the roller. He put both hands on the bumper of the sedan and pushed. He's strong for his size, but he wasn't going to move a stuck car uphill. He looked at me and mimed a strap. I nodded. I pulled forward slowly until the tow hook kissed the sedan's rear frame. I didn't want to attach anything that would take time to unhook if we needed to leave fast, so I used the hook to press and bump the sedan backward in small shoves, letting the tires spin just enough to warm, then resetting. After 3 pushes, the sedan rolled a foot, then 2. The gate's roller cleared the metal plate in the cement. Jamal yanked at the gate, and it squealed on dry bearings. He got it wide enough for the truck. Erin stood on the passenger step and scanned left and right. Frank kept low in the topper with the shotgun held tight and his eyes on the rear window. Lena called the count for how much room I had on the right, so I wouldn't clip the post with the bed. I inched through and pulled up inside the campus grounds. We shut the gate behind us and dropped the latch into the socket. It wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it gave us a layer. The asphalt inside the campus smelled like new tar in the warming air. The main entrance doors to the gym sat under a long overhang. The windows were not broken. The lights inside were off. We parked at an angle facing out, never nose in, and dismounted as a group with clear rolls. Jamal went to the door access panel because he knows how buildings are wired. Erin went left to check for any injured. Frank and I went right to clear the breezeway with eyes and ears, not guns first, and Lena stood by the truck radio to call if our view missed something. The door was locked. Jamal tried a key from the ring labelled custodian that hung on a pushpin in the front office back in normal time. He didn't have it now. The panel had a plastic cover and behind it a simple key switch. I took my multi-tool, loosened the cover screws and flipped the switch. The door buzzed dead. No power. That left us the crash bars. Frank said we could pop them with a pry bar carefully. Erin said, "Before we go in, we need to know if someone set this as a shelter and if they're still here." She cupped her hands around her mouth and called, If anyone is inside, we are neighbours, not police, not officials. We are opening the door slowly. We will stop if you tell us to. We waited. Nothing. I slipped the pry bar under the bar's cover and pushed until the mechanism gave a sharp, metallic pop. The door opened 3 inches. The air inside was cooler and smelled like dust and the last breath of a climate system that shut off hours before. We opened the door enough to slide through sideways and then closed it to a near latch, leaving it unlatched so we could move fast later. Inside the gym lobby, the trophy case glass reflected our headlamps and made duplicates of us. The concession stand shutter was down. The floor had footprints in dusty paths from last week's summer practice. No one had tracked fresh prints through the dust since last night. The gym itself would be large and echoing and hard to secure. Frank suggested the administrative wing instead. Offices have fewer doors. Erin nodded. We moved quietly down the hallway and checked rooms with a routine. One person scans, one person watches the hall, one person listens. You do that because you can't look in 6 directions at once. We found a security office with a bank of monitors and a rack of equipment resting in standby. The power light was off. Jamal checked the back of the rack and found an uninterruptible power supply. It had drained long ago. He pulled a small cable from his pack and spliced the UPS leads to his power bank, not to run the whole thing, but to bring a single camera circuit to life for a short window. One monitor flickered. It showed the courtyard, empty. Another showed the main gate we had just closed. It showed 3 people at the fence pressing against it with the slow, repeated motion of someone who forgot what they were trying to do halfway through the motion. They weren't the sprinting kind. They were the drifting kind. Jamal shut the monitor off to save his battery. We did a quick sweep of the nurse's office and found supply cabinets with simple locks. Erin has a steady hand with latches. She opened them without damage and inventoried what was useful. Saline, more gauze, an automatic external defibrillator, a blood glucose meter, and alcohol pads. We took the pads and gauze and left the rest where it was. The AED is heavy and wouldn't help with anything we could fix now. We moved back to the gym lobby and decided to hole up for not more than an hour to let the main road quiet after our movement. We ate a small portion of food and drank water, then planned the next hop. The map on the wall showed a service gate on the backside of the campus that opened toward the community centre and a line of low warehouses with loading docks. Those docks usually have roll-up doors that you can pull down and lock from inside. That would make a better overnight point than a gym with echoing walls and too many doors. We left the campus the way we came, using the gate and watching the fence line for movement. The 3 people at the fence turned their heads slowly as we moved, then turned away, then back again. We rolled out with the truck at idle and made the right toward the service road. The sky was fully lit now. The last of the sprinklers finished their cycle and dripped. As we pulled alongside the community centre, I saw what looked like a city truck parked half on the sidewalk. Door open, light bar dark. A clipboard sat on the passenger seat. The back had road cones and a coil of caution tape. I stopped and told Lena to watch the left. I stepped out, grabbed 2 cones and the tape, and put them in the truck bed. Cones make people go where you want them to go, even now. We reached the warehouse line and saw a good candidate. A 1-story beige block with a roll-up door half open and a side door propped with a stick. That usually means someone went in to move something heavy and planned to be right back. If they hadn't, the door would be closed. Frank told me to stay in the truck. He and Jamal would check the inside edge of the roll-up, while Erin and I watched the street. They moved in a fluid way that made me remember training weekends when city blocks were turned into practice fields. Frank placed his palm lightly against the roll-up, lifted 3 inches, and looked under. He held up 2 fingers and then a flat hand, 2 objects inside in line of sight, unknown. He lifted another inch and then used a mirror from Jamal's kit to scan left and right. He whispered, "Pallets, forklift, no movement." He nodded, and we opened the door enough for the truck to nose in. Once inside, we dropped the door and secured it with a chain through the track so no one could lift it easily from outside. We made darkness on purpose and then turned on one headlamp with the red filter so we wouldn't blind ourselves. The warehouse smelled like dust and motor oil. In the corner, I found a 2-post automotive lift like the one in my shop, which made me feel like I could move my hands without thinking. There were wire shelves with labelled boxes. A half-assembled display rack leaned against a wall. There was a water fountain that wouldn't run without power. In a back office, we found a coffee pot and a sealed tub of sugar packets. Someone had left a phone charger in an outlet. We took the sugar and left the rest. We moved the truck deeper inside so anyone peeking wouldn't see it near the door. We set a small perimeter with cones and tape inside the warehouse itself to remind us not to wander into lines of sight. You do simple things because they prevent complex mistakes. We stayed there for a little while and let our heart rates drop the way you do after a long drive in heavy weather. Frank radioed a quick check back to Mrs. Daniels and told her we'd return when it was safe, not today. She said she had canned soup and crackers and would be fine. Her voice was as steady as anyone's I had heard. Jamal climbed a metal rack with cat-like careful steps and set one camera high facing the roll-up so we'd get an alert if it moved. Erin sat on a pallet and took off her shoes to rub her feet and then put them back on and double-knotted the laces. Lena opened her pack and distributed snack bars, then folded the top of the empty wrappers so they wouldn't leak crumbs because crumbs become a trail. We made a decision then that I think saved us time we didn't know we had. We decided not to use the main roads anymore. We would cut through service alleys, back lots, and easements. We would move in blocks, each with a place to stop that had at least 2 exits. We would find a way to a friend's house on the far side of the river. He keeps a small boat and a water tank and a shed full of tools. But we wouldn't talk about that out loud yet, because plans change when the road bends. The high school had given us a lane to breathe. The warehouse gave us a second breath. We needed to string 10 breaths in a row without stumbling. When we finally rolled out again, the sun made the hood of the truck hot to the touch. We moved down the back line of loading docks in first gear, engine barely above idle, wheels bumping over the little lips where asphalt met concrete. We stopped at each corner, looked, listened, then advanced. We passed behind the strip mall and saw the aftermath of a run on the pharmacy, boxes torn open, a rolling chair stuck in a puddle, and a single prescription bag still stapled shut, as if the person who grabbed it realized it wasn't their name and dropped it. We didn't take anything. Erin said supplies taken without a plan create false confidence. I believed her. We crossed the small footbridge over the drainage canal that runs behind the community centre. The water moved slow, green with algae at the edges, and it carried a film of whatever washed off the streets. Jamal pointed to a maintenance path that paralleled it, hidden by a line of trees. We took it instead of the main road. It spit us out behind a row of townhouses, where the garages face an internal lane. We saw 2 people sitting on a curb, holding hands, looking at nothing. They didn't turn as we passed, and I don't know which category they belonged in. I shifted my eyes back to the path, because categories were for later. By late morning, the heat pushed us towards shade. We found it under the overhang of a storage facility and parked with the nose out. We dozed in shifts again. Jamal replaced batteries and checked notifications. Frank cleaned the shotgun with a small kit and a cloth and loaded it again, chamber empty. Erin checked our wrists for the permanent marker lines and rewrote Jamal's because sweat had faded it. Lena took a photo of the map we had drawn on the whiteboard in the warehouse office and copied it by hand in her notebook, because phone batteries die faster than anyone admits in heat. We ate and drank enough to function and not more. We listened to the radio as the anchor read the same guidance, then a new line about state resources and federal coordination. I pictured those words printed on the same sheet they always use, and then someone crossing them out later when the plan shifts. By the time the shadows stretched long again, we were 3 miles from home, and it felt like a continent because every right turn was deliberate and every left turn was a negotiation. We set our sights on a city maintenance yard, where I knew there would be fuel tanks behind a chain-link fence. They usually have a card reader that authenticates employees, but they also have gravity, hoses, and manual valves if you know where to look. We needed fuel for the generator, not just the truck. Half a tank buys time, but not options. We approached the yard with the sun at our back, which is bad for silhouettes, but good for maintaining glare on the far side if anyone is watching. The front gate was open 8 feet, and a truck sat half in, half out, like someone got interrupted during a normal morning. We slipped around the side and found the fuel tanks intact. The padlock on the valve box was locked. I used a pair of bolt cutters I keep behind the seat for cutting exhaust clamps and chain links in the shop, and the lock snapped. I opened the valve slowly to check for pressure. The smell of gasoline rose, clean and hard. I filled 2 cans and closed the valve. We didn't take more because full cans slosh and clank. I wired the valve box shut again with a small loop so it would look closed at a glance. It wouldn't fool anyone up close. Sometimes 3 minutes is all you need. We pulled around back to exit and saw a wall we hadn't counted on. A slow-moving line of figures in the alley behind the yard, all heading the same direction like they'd been drawn by a sound we hadn't heard. The line stretched past the dumpster and into the shade, turned at the corner, and continued. We waited for a minute to see if it thinned. It didn't. Erin said, "We don't need to cross that line. We can follow it from the other side at a distance, and it will tell us what it's following." That rang true. We backed up, turned into the storage aisles inside the yard, and found a parallel fence line, where the slats between the links gave us cover. We moved at walking speed behind them, pace matched to the line on the other side of the fence. It led us toward the river. At the riverfront, the sound we hadn't heard became clear. A siren stuck on a vehicle that had crashed nose first into a guardrail and stayed there with the alarm switched on and no one to turn it off. The line of infected gathered and bunched at the front of the vehicle like a pressure wave. We stopped 2 blocks back and used the side street to skirt around. The boat ramp sat clear. The floating dock moved in a gentle bob on the current, and 3 aluminum boats sat stacked beside a shed with a chain through the handles. I pictured my friend's place on the far shore and felt relief, and then pushed it away because feeling it early makes you sloppy. Frank checked the chain on the boats and said he could cut it with the same bolt cutters. I said we should leave them unless we had to cross right now because a boat telegraphs movement and distance. He agreed. We ended our day at a small industrial building with a steel door and a keypad that beeped when you touched it even without power. Inside, the air held the smell of packaged plastic and cardboard. There were shelves and a bathroom, and a small break room with a microwave. We secured the door with a pry bar under the handle. We layered a pushcart against it and ran a tie-down strap to a wall bracket. We set a watch. We ate. We didn't talk about what the neighborhood looked like when we left, because after you start naming objects out loud, you stop seeing them the way you need to. I lay down on a mat and listened to Lena's breath. I thought about the dog 2 doors down and wondered if someone had let him out. I pictured the yard and the bell on his collar. I told myself that tomorrow we would swing west, then north, then cross where the river is narrow and slow, then go up the hill to the row of houses with the big trees. I felt the permanent marker on my forearm like a band and thought about how I had written my own phone number without thinking, even though networks probably wouldn't be back in time for it to matter. We slept in pairs. When it was my watch, I sat with my back against the steel door and my feet on the pushcart to feel any shift. The building settled like warm bread cools, a pop at the corner, a creak at the rack, a gentle groan when the temperature dropped outside. I heard nothing else. At 1:10 a.m, Jamal shook me and whispered that the camera facing the roll-up had pinged once, then stopped. We listened. We made no sound. 5 minutes passed, 10. The quiet settled again. We slept in turns until 4 a.m. We left before dawn again. Same plan. Smoother this time, because repetition makes muscle memory where fear used to be. We navigated the cut behind the riverfront to avoid the siren's gravity. We rolled through a parking lot under a line of street lamps that had stayed on because their timers failed. One busted glass mantle sputtered and made a soft flick like a candle. At the edge of the lot, a family had set up a camp with a minivan parked tail out and a tarp strung between it and a picnic table. A small dog lay under the table, head on paws, eyes following us. We didn't stop because stopping makes you plan for 2 groups, not 1, and we weren't ready to do that. As we turned the corner, Lena squeezed my arm once. That was enough. The road up the far bank is steep and has a hairpin where the city posted a sign warning trucks to use low gear. I put the truck in first, kept the revs steady, and didn't touch the brake. At the top, the houses space out. Yards widen. There are more trees and fewer stores. Numbers fall off a little in places like that. We took a left toward the edge of the neighborhood where my friend keeps his boat. When we turned onto his street, I saw his mailbox open and his porch light dead. His truck sat in the driveway, empty. The front door was closed and intact. That was something. The side gate was latched from the inside. I pulled to the curb and cut the engine. We dismounted the same way. Frank low and right, Erin left, Lena at the radio, Jamal eyes up, me with the pry bar and a flashlight. I knocked on the door with the soft rhythm we used when we were kids to signal we weren't strangers. No answer. I used the spare key he keeps shaped like a guitar pick under the 3rd brick from the left. He showed me that when he asked me to water his plants last summer. I turned the lock. The door opened 4 inches and stopped against a chain. I called his name. No answer. I looked through the crack and saw the living room as clean as he keeps it, with a coffee mug next to the TV remote and a slip of mail on the coffee table. I closed the door and looked at Erin. She shook her head once. We backed away and didn't force it. Houses keep stories, and you should only open them if you're ready. We moved to the backyard. The shed was locked and the greenhouse glass was intact. The boat, a small aluminum skiff with an outboard and a fuel tank under the bench, sat on a trailer with the hitch locked. I have a key that fits that lock because we bought the same model at the same big box store, and he copied it for me as a joke. I opened the lock and we lowered the tongue quietly, 2 of us on it to ease it down. We rolled the trailer backward onto the lawn to hide it from the street, and then we paused. The river glinted through the trees 100 yards away. It looked like a road running level, but it's a road that doesn't forgive mistakes. Frank said if we launched, we had to commit to the far bank, because turning around in the current with a small outboard is a chore and a risk. Erin said we should wait until late afternoon when the wind drops so the surface stays flat. Jamal said he could mount a camera on the bow to help with depth perception in the glare. Lena said she trusted us. We stood in a circle and counted pros and cons in plain language. We decided to stay until evening and then make the crossing with the sun at our backs and a low profile. We spent the day preparing for that one action. We checked the outboard and changed the plug. We siphoned fuel from the truck into the boat tank and added stabilizer. We found life jackets where my friend always keeps them and checked straps for fraying. We packed the medical kit in a dry bag and tied it to a seat bracket. We distributed weight so the bow would trim clean. We laid 2 paddles on the floorboards within easy reach. We pre-tied bow and stern lines to cleats and coiled them so they would pay out without snagging. We packed the generator and 2 fuel cans in the bed, then packed a tarp and ratchet straps because at the far bank we would drag the boat and cover it. We kept our voices steady and our hands moving. That's how you get to evening without making a choice you can't reverse. When the light went amber and long, we moved. We hitched the trailer, closed the tailgate and rolled down to the public ramp where the siren had finally died, either from battery drain or because someone reached in and turned it off. The ramp had 3 trucks at odd angles, 2 with empty trailers, 1 with a trailer half down. We threaded past them and backed the trailer until the boat floated. Frank steadied the bow line while I stepped into the stern and lowered the motor. Erin and Lena held the gunnels to keep it from drifting, while Jamal set the camera and checked the radio. We loaded in order, weight balanced, and pushed off. The motor coughed once, then started. I kept the throttle low and the tiller straight until we cleared the eddy at the dock. The current took our bow and I corrected with small motions. The river ran smooth with a few ripples where wind touched it. The far bank was 50 yards. It looked twice that because of nerves. Midway across, a piece of driftwood popped up near the bow and I nudged around it. Jamal called distance like he was spotting on a trail. 10 left, 5 ahead, clear right. Erin watched the far bank for movement. Lena watched our wake to see if anyone tracked us. We kept our bodies low. We didn't talk. The bow nosed into the far bank's mud with a soft bump. Frank jumped out first and pulled the bowline around a stump. I killed the motor and tilted it up. We stepped onto the bank without hurry and dragged the boat up 2 more feet so the current wouldn't tug it. Jamal and I hauled the trailer tongue while Frank kept the stern straight. We covered the boat with the tarp and secured it with straps. We stood for a second in the shade and let our breathing catch up. We had changed sides. That was the plan for the day. The rest would wait until morning, when the air is cool and the sound carries differently and people sleep a little harder if they can. I looked back across the water at the line of warehouses, the high school bleachers, and the cracked white letters on the grocery store sign. From that distance, the cul-de-sac where we lived looked like any other. The truck sat on the far side near the ramp, partly hidden between 2 city trucks with their logos faded in the sun. It looked small. It was enough. We turned into the trees and followed a footpath that cut up the hill to the street grid. And for the first time since the TV lights flickered at 8 p.m. the night before, I let myself say the next plan out loud. We would reach the water tower on the ridge, because it has a service road and a fence and a hatch that locks. We would build from there. We would find more people who could listen. We would stay quiet, move on purpose, and not waste the daylight. That wasn't optimism. It was a list of steps. You follow steps when the world forgets how to. And as we climbed, I took one last look over my shoulder at the place that had been home. The sun caught pieces of glass in the street and made them blink like distant turn signals. Sprinklers had shut off hours ago, and the grass was already losing its sheen. Children's toys sat where they fell. It looked normal until you stood still long enough to feel the temperature of it. I turned away. The path bent. The ridge waited. We kept moving. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.